Dan Bilzerian, even if you are not a poker fan, you have surely heard of this name. A person who once dominated Instagram, someone who became famous as the epitome of the luxurious lifestyle. Yacht parties and mansions, along with a collection of expensive supercars, a vast arsenal of weapons, surrounded by dozens of stunning models. And then, everything seemed to change with his post on Twitter. Nothing is more wonderful than winning when everyone is watching, waiting for you to fail. Just last month, Dan Bilzerian lost to 120,000 subscribers, the most on March 31st, 2024, with 5,419 followers lost in a single day. The total number of subscribers he has lost over the past 6 months is 603,163. This has caused Dan's stock price to plummet to the point where it had to be withdrawn from the exchange, accompanied by an investigation by the NEC into his financial activities. Currently, Dan Bilzerian is mimicking Andrew Tate by selling books and self-development courses for men under the name Sigma Society. But that's not the worst part. The collection of supercars, the lavish parties in multi-million-dollar mansions, all the reality revealed as fake, leading to the downfall of the so-called King of Instagram, Dan Bilzerian. In July 2020, 18 months after the establishment of Ignite, Dan Bilzerian fired the company president, Curtis Heffernan. Before that, Heffernan had been a senior executive at Procter & Gamble. Heffernan then sued Dan Bilzerian for wrongful termination during the process of exposing his fake business model. According to Heffernan's lawsuit, Dan didn't actually pay $65 million for his mansion, but it was rented for $2.4 million annually. Even more surprisingly, the number of followers on Instagram and the hot models accompanying him were also hired for $26,000, rather than being voluntary as he had previously claimed, and that is not all. The lawsuit also highlighted the costs Dan used to maintain his fake lifestyle, including a Star Wars-themed gun collection worth $65,000, a painted basketball court for $75,000, a cash vault containing $88,000, a bed frame worth $50,000, and a $500,000 yacht. The total expenses the company had to pay for his activities could reach up to $900,000. Heffernan stated that he was asked by some senior executives and board members of Ignite to sign off on these as legitimate business expenses. However, he refused due to suspicions of fraud. He even tried to persuade Dan to stop renting the mansion for $200,000 a month because, due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, Dan could no longer host lavish parties and events. Guess how the King of Instagram reacted to this advice? Dan responded by joining and becoming the chairman of the board, saying, "I will host more pool parties and still use that mansion." The next day, he accused Heffernan of drug use during a meeting, and the company used that as a reason to fire him in June 2020. They dismissed Heffernan's allegations in a statement sent to the news outlet TMZ. However, former anonymous employees of Ignite confirmed that Heffernan's accusations were true. They revealed that Ignite paid for everything. Dan just partied and slapped the Ignite logo on those activities. Suddenly, everything became an expense the company had to cover. The events had nothing to do with business operations, yet he still sent the invoices for Ignite to pay. On his Twitter, Dan wrote, "Some journalists say that Ignite is the main sponsor of my lifestyle. Those bastards. I have worked hard for 10 years and become famous over the past 7 years. I started Ignite 2 years ago, raised about $100 million, and owned the largest share in the company. Sick my duck." Despite the arrogant and confident response, there is one thing that cannot lie: the numbers. Ignite's annual report shows staggering losses. The company lost $69 million, offset by only $9.7 million in revenue. The reason, as explained by the lawsuit, is how horrifically the money was spent. This caused BLIZF stock to plummet nearly 90% from 2.5 to a low of 28 cents in October 2020. When the media reported on Dan Bilzerian's losses, he responded by posting a tweet. "Uber is valued at $80 billion. The company has never had a profitable month since its inception and lost $5 billion in total revenue last quarter." So what caused Ignite to almost collapse when the losses were not the worst part? Dan's lavish lifestyle and parties were what attracted the audience. Hefferan's lawsuit exposed everything. All the things Dan Bilzerian used to amaze people with his extravagant lifestyle were just rented props. His lifestyle was once a mystery and intriguing, But it lost its charm when people realized that the wealthy, partying guy they admired on Instagram from 2014 until now was just using a business tool to deceive them. Everything was reflected in the Instagram statistics. In May 2020, Dan nearly stopped posting entirely on Instagram. From then until the end of the year, Dan began losing followers. The media began speculating that he would soon fall into bankruptcy. Maintaining his typical arrogant demeanor, he responded. Dan posted a picture of a skeleton with the tweet, "All those stupid journalists are still waiting for Xline to go bankrupt. Although the company hasn't filed for bankruptcy, that doesn't mean everything is going well." After losing $69 million in 2019, Ignite lost an additional $19.7 million in 2020. Moreover, the media revealed another strange detail. Dan's father, Paul Bilzerian, is said to be running Ignite from behind the scenes. Currently, this is a major issue for the following reason. Paul Bilzerian was a convicted criminal for corruption. In 1991, the FEC fined Paul Bilzerian $62 million for financial fraud. However, to date, Paul has only paid $3.7 million of the fine, with the remaining amount unpaid due to claimed inability to pay. Furthermore, he served a year in prison for fraud in the 90s, forcing Dan Bilzerian to pretend that his relationship with his father was not good. However, according to an article, Paul Bilzerian has taken on a less shady role in the company, including sending thousands of emails between him and other executives. At that time, this was just speculation, but if Paul was indeed running the company, he must have started doing something right. Despite losing $19.7 million in 2020, the company actually recorded a profit in the final quarter. Explaining this, Forbes reported a nearly 75% cut in the advertising budget. The pandemic meant fewer parties, and for Ignite, that meant more opportunities to make a profit. Evidence showed that the economic conditions improved in 2021. Dan's stock began to recover rapidly. It quadrupled from 28 cents per share in October 2020 to 1.13 per share in November 2021. This resulted in the company's revenue reaching $78.8 million in 2021 compared to $16.9 million in 2020. At that point, Dan made a statement that he wanted to sell the company. However, once again, the chance to achieve this amount began to diminish as Dan's company's value started plummeting. The recovery efforts Dan made in 2021 were completely reversed throughout 2022. Part of it was due to an incident that occurred. The SEC is suing the company for failing to produce documents as they sought to pursue an investigation into accounting fraud. According to the lawsuit, SEC staff discovered information indicating that the defendant may have filed publicly disclosed financial statements, including materially false statements about revenue recognition for the company's fiscal year ended December 31, 2020, possibly overstating their revenue. With the stock heading towards record lows, Dan addressed this issue by completely delisting Ignite from the stock exchange. He did not provide any explanation for delisting the company. Just 2 months later, MJ Biz Daily somehow managed to interview Dan Bilzerian's father, who stated that he is currently an unpaid advisor for his son's company and is speaking on behalf of Ignite, as Dan was unavailable for comment. Although Ignite was publicly traded, about 90% of the company's stock was owned by Dan and his associates. Paul Bilzerian further commented that Dan may have thought that as a celebrity, he should have a company even though this structure did not bring any real benefits and instead attracted unwanted attention from regulatory agencies and the media. Dan had boasted on Ignite's Instagram by claiming that Ignite's vape products were the best-selling in the US that year, but some customers objected to this claim, while his Instagram presence as the Instagram King was also not very favorable. His follower count continuously dropped each month, partly because he was inactive altogether. When he did post a new photo, most comments were mocking remarks from followers. Just a few months ago on the Skinny Confidential Podcast YouTube channel, Dan explained why he walked away from everything. Perhaps Dan Bilzerian was quite disillusioned with his social media career and perhaps had grown weary of being disliked. However, let's speculate on his next business move to see if it can bring in revenue. After spending considerable time with Unrooted, Dan Bilzerian launched his own men's course on the Sigma Society website, and in such a risky venture, it might just be another money-making gimmick, and it seems this guy has no more value to offer.